The unlikely Cadet emerges in the Empire. In the vast empire of Ardentia, strength and honor were prized above all else. The mighty armies and powerful leaders set the stage for legendary warriors. Yet in the midst of this grand tradition, a humble human cadet named Lyra began her journey. Lyra was not born into wealth or fame. Her family was simple, and she had grown up in a small village on the empire's edge. From an early age, she learned the value of hard work and determination. At the Ardentian Military Academy, every cadet was expected to show bravery and skill. Lyra, however, was looked upon as an underdog. Her small frame and unassuming nature led many to underestimate her. The other cadets, trained in the art of war from birth, would laugh at her quiet manner and simple dreams. Even her instructors doubted her ability to succeed among such esteemed warriors. Yet deep in her heart, Lyra believed that true strength was not only measured by physical might, but also by the spirit and will to keep trying. Each morning, while the academy buzzed with the sounds of drills and clashing swords, Lyra would rise before dawn to practice alone. With only a wooden practice sword and her own resolve, she would run through the empty training grounds. She repeated every move until it felt natural, even if her body ached from the strain. She practiced until the cold wind could be felt in every muscle, and the bright light of the rising sun revealed her determination. Even though she had no special guidance or advanced equipment, Lyra's simple training laid the foundation for something greater. As days turned into weeks, rumors began to spread. Some whispered that Lyra's humble background hid a secret skill, one that would someday surprise even the harshest critics. Others believed she had a rare gift that could change the face of the Empire's future battles. But for now, Lyra remained a quiet figure in the crowded halls of the Academy, moving steadily without drawing much attention. Her actions spoke louder than her words ever could. One evening, after a long day of exhausting drills, Lyra sat alone under a large oak tree on the Academy grounds. The cool breeze carried the distant sound of clashing swords and echoing commands. She closed her eyes and thought of her family back home, of the simple life she once knew, and the promise she made to herself to never give up. This promise was her secret strength, a light in the darkness that would guide her path even when others could not see it. Unbeknownst to her, that night the Empire's leaders were watching. In the great hall of the Academy, the commanders discussed the future of Ardentia's military. They spoke of the coming wars and the need for brave soldiers who could change the tide of battle. A young lieutenant, who had once doubted Lyra like many others, recalled her determined eyes during practice. He remembered the quiet determination that set her apart from the others. "There is something different about her," he said softly, his voice filled with a mix of surprise and admiration. "Her spirit is strong. Perhaps one day she will prove her worth on the battlefield." The next morning, during the daily parade, all cadets lined up in perfect formation. The commanders watched intently, their eyes scanning the ranks for any sign of true potential. Lyra, standing quietly at the back, felt her heart pound with a mix of fear and hope. The bright sunlight illuminated the faces of the cadets, and for a moment, she wondered if she could truly belong in such a fierce world. But then, a small smile crept over her face, a sign that she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the parade continued, a sudden announcement echoed through the courtyard. A distant territory on the frontier was under attack, and urgent reinforcements were needed. The commanders hurriedly organized a group of cadets to join the expedition. Many of the best warriors were chosen, but surprisingly, Lyra found herself selected as well. No one knew why the selection fell on her, but the young lieutenant's quiet recommendation was enough to secure her place among the few chosen. In that moment, the Academy buzzed with shock and anticipation. The underdog was about to be tested in real combat. Lyra's simple background and unremarkable appearance suddenly became the focus of every eye. She was both the subject of curiosity and the embodiment of hope, a symbol that courage and determination could come from the humblest origins. As she prepared to leave for the battlefield, Lyra took one last look at the academy that had been her world. With a deep breath, She stepped forward into the unknown, her heart filled with determination and a quiet promise to prove that even the most unlikely cadet could rise to greatness. Her journey had only just begun, and the Empire of Ardentia would soon learn that true strength comes from within, where courage and hard work shine brightest in the darkest of times. Early struggles and mockery. Lyra's new life at the Academy was filled with both challenges and moments of quiet suffering. Each day, she faced grueling training sessions where her body ached and her mind was pushed to its limits. The very place where she had hoped to find her true potential instead became a stage for constant trials. In the crowded training yard, the other cadets practiced with sharp swords and powerful shouts. They moved as if they had been born to fight. Lyra, with her modest skills and small frame, found herself stumbling through drills that were second nature to them. Every missed step or misdirected swing brought laughter from those around her. The taunts were never cruel, yet they stung deeply. They called her Little Lyra and whispered that she would never be a real warrior. For many days, her efforts went unnoticed or were met with sneers. When the instructors demonstrated techniques, Lyra struggled to keep up. The repetitive nature of her training often left her feeling exhausted and isolated. Even the simplest exercise seemed insurmountable when every mistake was highlighted by her peers. At times, she would sit on the cold ground in the dim light of early morning, feeling the weight of rejection pressing down on her. Despite the mocking and the setbacks, Lyra refused to give up. In the silent hours before dawn, she rose and practiced on her own again and again. Her determination grew with every struggle. Though the Academy's walls echoed with laughter at her expense, her heart held a quiet hope that one day all this pain would lead to something great. One training session, after a particularly difficult drill, marked a turning point in her daily struggle. The commander had organized a mock battle where groups of cadets had to face off against each other. Lyra's group was assigned the most challenging task: to defend a weak outpost against a simulated enemy. The plan was simple for those who were strong and quick, but Lyra's group was unbalanced, and her own skills were still raw. As the mock enemy approached, the cheers and jeers of the other cadets filled the air. Lyra's hands trembled as she gripped her wooden sword. She saw the sneers on her teammates' faces, and for a moment, doubt crept in. They had all expected her to be a liability, an easy mark for ridicule. Yet, in that moment of uncertainty, something stirred within her. The battle began, and chaos filled the training ground. The enemy's simulated attacks came fast and hard. Lyra found herself surrounded, her mind racing as she tried to recall every lesson taught to her. In the thick of the confusion, she blocked an attack, then countered with a move that surprised even her. Though she wasn't the fastest or the strongest, her moves were unpredictable and filled with heart. In the midst of the fight, a few of her teammates began to look at her with new eyes. Her movements, though clumsy at times, carried a passion and determination that the others had never seen before. For the first time, the laughter faded, replaced by a sense of cautious respect. Lyra's actions slowly began to change the tide of the mock battle. With each strike, she defied the expectations that had been placed upon her. Yet, even after the exercise ended, the echoes of earlier mockery lingered. In the debriefing, the instructors praised the stronger cadets for their flawless execution, and Lyra's contribution was largely ignored. Back in the quiet corridors of the Academy, whispers continued. Some still doubted her abilities, while others wondered if the small spark they saw was enough to ignite something more powerful. Every night, Lyra lay awake in her small room, replaying the day's events in her mind. The memories of the mockery haunted her, but so did the fleeting moments when she had felt the thrill of success. In the silence of the dark, she promised herself that no amount of laughter or doubt could stop her. Her struggle was part of her journey, and every hardship was a lesson in disguise. As days turned into weeks, the routine of struggle and occasional triumph became a part of her life. The Academy was not just a place of learning, but also a battleground for her self-worth. With each practice session, each mock battle, and each whispered insult, Lyra grew a little stronger. The journey was long, and the road was rocky, but she clung to the belief that every small victory would eventually lead her to greatness. The other cadets began to notice her resilience. Even if her techniques were not yet refined, her willpower was unmistakable. A quiet murmur began among the ranks. Perhaps Lyra was more than just an underdog. Perhaps with time and perseverance, she could become a force to be reckoned with. While the mockery had not disappeared completely, its sting was slowly being replaced by a reluctant admiration. In the end, the struggle and the mockery served a deeper purpose. They revealed Lyra's inner strength, a strength that lay hidden beneath the surface of her humble beginnings. Though she had been laughed at and doubted, her determination shone through. Her journey was far from over, and the harsh lessons of the academy were only the beginning of a path that would lead to unexpected glory. Lyra's early struggles and the mockery she endured were not signs of her weakness, but stepping stones toward her future as a warrior. With every trial, she prepared herself for the challenges that lay ahead, knowing that one day the Empire would see the true power of her heart and spirit. Secret training and determination. After the mock battle, when the Academy's corridors fell silent and the laughter of the day had faded, Lyra retreated into the quiet corners of her world. Determined to overcome the struggles and the mockery she faced every day, she began a secret training routine. This training was not part of the regular schedule, and no one at the Academy knew of it except for Lyra herself. In the early hours of the morning, before the first light touched the sky, Lyra would slip away from her small quarters. With only a wooden sword and a bundle of simple practice tools, she headed to a secluded training ground behind the Academy walls. There, amid tall grasses and hidden from the view of others, she created a small space where she could focus completely on her skills. This was her sanctuary, a place where failure was not recorded and every mistake was only a step toward improvement. Each day, Lyra began her routine with stretching and slow movements to warm up her muscles. She remembered the sharp, precise moves of the instructors, but also the errors that had led to her failures. In that quiet space, she studied her own reflections in a small pool of water, watching her form and slowly correcting her stance. The silence of the early morning was filled with the soft sounds of her determined practice, a stark contrast to the noisy hustle of the Academy later in the day. Lyra worked on every skill she needed to master. She practiced parrying, thrusting, and the delicate footwork required to move quickly in battle. Every movement was repeated again and again until it no longer felt awkward. There were many mornings when her arms grew tired and her legs ached, but she pushed through the pain. In those moments, she would think of her family and the promise she had made to herself to never give up. This thought kept her focused and strong, even when exhaustion threatened to slow her down. At times, the training grew so intense that she would lose track of time. When the sun climbed higher in the sky, Lyra's secret sessions would come to an end, and she would return quietly to her room before anyone noticed her absence. Despite the risk of being caught, she felt that these moments were worth every sacrifice. With each passing day, her moves became smoother and more confident. The awkward swings began to form into deliberate, well-practiced techniques. Even though her progress was slow, every improvement was a victory in itself. There were moments when Lyra would pause during her training to think about the criticisms and taunts she had endured. Instead of letting them break her spirit, she used those memories as fuel for her determination. Each insult, each laugh from her fellow cadets, was turned into a quiet vow that she would become better. In the solitude of her secret training ground, she forged a bond with her own potential, a bond that grew stronger with every drop of sweat and every bruise that marked her skin. Sometimes, Lyra experimented with different methods, trying to combine the techniques taught by the instructors with the unique moves she felt in her heart. She observed the graceful fighters among her peers from a distance and would later try to mimic their movements in her private sessions. Over time, she discovered a personal style that was neither perfect nor traditional, but it was uniquely her own. It was a blend of careful learning and instinctive reaction, a reflection of both her natural talent and her relentless hard work. As the days turned into weeks, her secret training began to show tangible results. Lyra noticed that her balance improved and her reflexes became quicker. Her confidence, once fragile and hidden, started to shine through every movement. Though she still faced moments of frustration when a technique did not work as expected, she learned to see these setbacks as challenges rather than failures. Each error became a lesson, and every lesson brought her one step closer to mastering the art of combat. The quiet determination that Lyra nurtured in these private hours slowly seeped into her everyday life at the academy. During group drills, she moved with a newfound grace that made her opponents pause in surprise. The instructors began to note a subtle change in her performance, even if they did not yet fully understand the source of her improvement. Her secret training was becoming the hidden force behind her strength, a strength that was still largely unseen by those who mocked her. In the solitude of her early mornings and the dim light of dusk, Lyra built not just her combat skills, but her inner resolve. The secret training sessions were a time of reflection, growth, and hope. With every drop of sweat and every practiced move, she was crafting a future where she would no longer be seen as the underdog. Instead, she was becoming a warrior defined by her own perseverance and willpower. Lyra's secret training was a testament to her belief that greatness is earned quietly, away from the eyes of skeptics. It was in these moments of intense practice that she found her true strength, a strength that would one day help her face the challenges of the battlefield and shock the forces that had once doubted her. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Lyra's determination shone brighter than ever. With every secret session, she was closer to transforming herself from the unlikely Cadet into a formidable warrior capable of changing the fate of her empire. The unexpected call to battle. One bright morning, as the first rays of sunlight began to warm the Empire's training grounds, the routine of the academy was suddenly shattered by urgent news. A messenger arrived in a burst of dust and noise, riding hard across the courtyard. His words spread quickly. A distant territory on the Empire's frontier was under sudden attack, and reinforcements were needed immediately. The Empire's forces were stretched thin, and every capable soldier was needed on the front lines. Inside the great hall of the academy, the commanders gathered quickly. Their faces were grim as they discussed the situation. They spoke in low, urgent tones about the enemy's unexpected push and the fragile state of their defenses. For many cadets, the news stirred a mix of fear and excitement. The opportunity to see real combat was both a challenge and a dream come true, even if it meant facing danger. Lyra, who had spent countless early mornings honing her skills in secret, listened quietly from a corner of the hall. Though she had always been seen as the underdog, deep inside, her heart beat faster at the thought of real battle. The lessons she had learned in isolation now whispered a promise of opportunity. In that moment, the chance to prove herself was closer than ever. As the selection for the reinforcement unit began, names were called with authority and precision. Many of the top-ranked cadets, known for their speed and strength, were chosen first. Lyra stood quietly, barely noticeable among the ranks. Yet, to her surprise, when the commanding officer began reading out the final names, her own name was called. The room fell silent for a moment, and eyes turned toward the unlikely Cadet who had been overlooked for so long. A young lieutenant, who had quietly observed Lyra's secret efforts, had spoken up during the selection. He reminded the commanders that sometimes hidden strength and unexpected skill were the very qualities needed in battle. His words were met with nods of agreement, and despite the murmurs of disbelief, Lyra was placed among the chosen reinforcements. The decision was both shocking and hopeful, proof that even the underdog could have a moment to shine. Before the unit departed, Lyra had little time to collect her thoughts. The night before, she had hardly slept, her mind racing with visions of both danger and the chance to show what she had learned. Now, as she stood among her fellow cadets readying for the march, she felt the weight of her destiny. The training grounds, which had been her secret refuge, now seemed like a distant memory compared to the looming reality of battle. The journey to the frontier was long and fraught with tension. The group traveled in a silent, determined line, the cool morning air filled with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Lyra's mind wandered to the many early mornings spent practicing alone. Each moment of doubt and every small victory had led her to this point. Her simple determination was now being put to the ultimate test. Along the journey, the cadets exchanged stories of past battles and whispered their fears, yet none could ignore the silent hope that came with every step forward. As they neared the battlefield, the scenery changed drastically. The lush training grounds gave way to rugged terrain and a sense of urgency in the air. In the distance, smoke rose from a village, and the sounds of clashing metal and distant shouts reached their ears. The full reality of the situation hit them. The enemy had already made their move, and the fragile frontier was at risk. In the command tent set up near the front line, the leaders quickly reviewed the battle plan. Maps and strategies were spread out on a wooden table, and every cadet was given a role. Lyra listened intently as her superior explained how their unit would be deployed. Despite the seriousness of the discussion, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and excitement. This was no longer a drill or a mock battle. It was real, and every decision could mean the difference between victory and defeat. With her simple wooden sword replaced by a real one, and the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, Lyra joined her comrades at the edge of the battlefield. The air was heavy with anticipation as they took their positions. The sounds of conflict grew louder, a chaotic symphony of war that both terrified and thrilled her. She remembered all her secret training sessions, each moment of isolation and perseverance, and found strength in those memories. At that critical moment, as the enemy forces advanced, Lyra's senses sharpened. She could see the fear and determination in the eyes of her fellow cadets, and she knew that her own chance to prove herself had arrived. The young lieutenant who had championed her belief in hidden potential stood by her side, offering a small nod of encouragement. In that silent exchange, Lyra felt a surge of determination. The doubts and mockery of the past were replaced by a burning resolve to protect her empire and honor the promise she had made to herself. Then the call to battle sounded, a sharp, commanding shout from the nearest officer. The orderly line of cadets broke into swift action, and the sound of marching boots mixed with the clamor of warfare. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding like a drum, ready to face the enemy. In that moment, she was no longer just the unlikely cadet from the academy. She was a warrior with a secret strength, a fighter whose quiet determination was now her greatest weapon. As the clash of battle began in earnest, every step forward became a testament to Lyra's transformation. The unexpected call to battle had forced her into a world of real danger and true heroism. With every swing of her sword and every calculated move, she sought to silence the doubts that had followed her for so long. In the chaos of war, Lyra's journey from the shadows of the academy to the heart of the battlefield had truly begun, and the forces of the Empire could now witness the rise of a true warrior. The battlefield breakthrough. In the midst of the chaos, the battlefield transformed into a stage for unexpected heroism. As the clash of arms grew louder and the clash of wills became clear, Lyra found herself at the center of the storm. The enemy forces surged forward with relentless determination, their armor glinting under the harsh light of the battlefield. The cadets around her fought valiantly, their voices raised in orders and cries of defiance. Yet amid the turmoil, Lyra's heart pounded with a focused calm that had been honed in countless secret mornings. The enemy advanced in waves, and with each step, the noise of battle swelled. Lyra gripped her real sword tightly, remembering every lesson from her hidden training sessions. When the first enemy soldier charged towards her, she instinctively stepped aside and blocked a heavy swing aimed at her chest. In that split second, her movements were both cautious and daring. The swift parry and counter-strike caught the enemy off guard, and his surprised cry was lost among the clamor of battle. As she moved through the fray, Lyra's style was different from that of her fellow warriors. While others relied on brute force and practiced formations, she combined her instinct with the simple techniques she had refined alone. Every movement was precise, every step calculated. Her actions were not the product of formal training alone, but of a deep-seated determination to rise above the ridicule that had once defined her. With each enemy that fell before her, a small cheer arose from her comrades who had begun to see the strength in her unexpected style. The tide of the battle began to shift as Lyra's breakthrough became more apparent. In one moment, she was surrounded by a group of enemy soldiers, their weapons raised and eyes fixed on her. The odds seemed stacked against her, and a murmur of concern rippled through her unit. But Lyra's mind raced back to the quiet hours of her secret training. In her heart, she carried a promise to prove that even the most underestimated could overcome any challenge. With a deep, steadying breath, Lyra moved with a burst of energy. She sidestepped the first attacker and delivered a swift counter that sent him reeling. The others hesitated, surprised by her speed and skill. She dodged a thrust, parried a heavy blow, and then advanced with a series of calculated strikes that left the enemy disoriented. In those tense moments, every action counted, and Lyra's determination shone through each decisive move. As the enemy regrouped for another charge, a sudden silence fell over a small corner of the battlefield. Lyra, now standing firm in the midst of chaos, became the focal point of this brief lull. Her eyes locked onto a leader among the enemy ranks, a man whose presence had commanded respect among his own troops. With a single, deliberate motion, Lyra broke the pause. She dashed forward, her sword aimed with a clarity born from long nights of self-doubt turned into hard-won confidence. The enemy leader met her charge with a mix of surprise and fury. Their blades clashed in a burst of sparks, and for several heartbeats, the world around them blurred into the raw intensity of their duel. Each strike Lyra made was measured and true, a perfect blend of the lessons learned in isolation and the brutal demands of real combat. The enemy leader fought back fiercely, but the determination in Lyra's eyes never wavered. She moved with an agile grace that belied her modest beginnings, her every action a testament to the secret hours of practice that had prepared her for this moment. Around them, the battle raged on, but in that personal duel, time seemed to slow. The enemy leader's strong blows were met with Lyra's nimble defenses, and gradually, the balance of power began to tip. A well-timed feint allowed her to break through his guard, and with one clean, decisive strike, she disarmed him. The fall of the enemy leader sent a ripple of shock through his ranks. His soldiers, once confident and fierce, now hesitated, unsure of how to react to the unexpected prowess of the unlikely cadet. In the wake of her breakthrough, the atmosphere on the battlefield shifted. Lyra's comrades, once filled with skepticism, now fought with renewed vigor. They saw in her a spark that reignited their own fighting spirit. Even those who had doubted her found themselves inspired by her tenacity. With every swing of her sword, every deft maneuver, Lyra proved that her quiet determination had transformed into a powerful force on the field of battle. The enemy, now rattled by the unexpected strength of a single cadet, began to falter in their assault. Lyra moved with the confidence of someone who had overcome a lifetime of mockery and hardship. The once dismissed underdog was now at the forefront of a breakthrough that was turning the tide of combat. Each strike she delivered was a blow against the doubts of the past, and every movement was a declaration that true strength comes from perseverance and heart. As the battle continued, Lyra's breakthrough was clear. Her actions had not only saved her unit from a dire situation, but also signaled to the entire empire that the future of their forces might lie in the unlikeliest of heroes. The battlefield, filled with noise and chaos, had become a canvas where one cadet's quiet resolve painted a picture of hope and triumph. In that moment, as she stood amidst the fallen foes and rising cheers, Lyra knew that her journey was just beginning. Shock and awe among the forces. After the tide of battle turned, the shock among the Empire's forces was almost tangible. In the heat of combat, as the enemy began to retreat, the cadets and commanders alike could not help but notice the dramatic change in the atmosphere. Lyra's unexpected breakthrough had not only disarmed an enemy leader, but had also ignited a wave of awe throughout the ranks. In the moments that followed her decisive strike, silence spread over a small section of the battlefield. Soldiers paused, their eyes fixed on the unlikely warrior who had turned the fight around with a single clean move. It was as if time itself had slowed down. Even the clamor of clashing swords and shouted commands seemed to soften. For many, the shock came from witnessing someone they had once written off as an underdog suddenly rise to challenge the enemy with unmatched bravery. Commanders who had grown accustomed to a rigid order and predictable power exchanged surprised looks. Whispers ran through the ranks. Could this be true? Some murmured, recalling how Lyra had been mocked only days before. Others, who had been on the edge of despair moments earlier, found new hope in the unexpected prowess of one of their own. Her calm, precise moves were not only a display of skill, but also a bold declaration that the Empire's future might lie in the hands of those who dared to be different. In the command tent, the high-ranking officers gathered around maps and reports, trying to process the rapidly changing situation. A young lieutenant, who had long believed in Lyra's hidden potential, now spoke with renewed conviction. Her actions today show that true strength isn't always measured by size or experience. It comes from the heart, he said, his voice carrying both admiration and a newfound respect. His words resonated with many in the room, and soon the idea spread that Lyra's approach, combining instinct with relentless practice, might be the key to winning more than just one battle. Back on the field, the shift in mood was evident. The cadets, who had once looked upon Lyra with skepticism, now fought with a mixture of excitement and caution. They saw in her the embodiment of resilience and were inspired to push their own limits. The battle had taken on a different character now. It was no longer just a clash of armies, but also a demonstration of the power of determination and the spirit of innovation. Soldiers began to mirror Lyra's unorthodox moves, trying to replicate the fluidity and precision that had caught the enemy off guard. The shock among the enemy was equally pronounced. Their formation wavered as they struggled to come to terms with the unexpected defiance of the cadets. The enemy leader's fall had sown doubt among his ranks. What had begun as a well-planned assault was now turning into a disorganized retreat. Their own soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain if the fierce warrior they faced could be overcome so swiftly. This uncertainty allowed the Empire's forces to regroup, seizing the moment to press on. In the heat of the renewed offensive, the battlefield transformed into a place where morale was as important as weapons and shields. The shock and awe that Lyra's actions had created became a rallying cry. Many of the cadets, emboldened by her example, began to fight with a new sense of purpose. Their movements became sharper, their responses quicker, and each step they took carried the promise of overcoming long-held doubts. The transformation was not immediate for everyone, but slowly, the energy of hope began to replace the earlier fear. Lyra herself, though still modest in her demeanor, felt a growing strength within her. Every shout of approval from her comrades, every nod from a commander, and every step forward taken by a fellow soldier filled her with quiet pride. Yet, amid the newfound admiration, she remained focused on the task at hand. She knew that this breakthrough was just a turning point. The battle was not yet won, and the true test of her strength would come in the challenges that lay ahead. As the sounds of battle shifted from chaotic clashes to a more measured, determined rhythm, the Empire's forces began to stabilize their line. The shock from Lyra's earlier feat had rippled across the front, creating pockets of resistance that grew stronger with each passing minute. Commanders used this moment to reinforce their strategies, integrating the unexpected lessons learned from Lyra's actions into their battle plans. By the end of the skirmish, as the enemy withdrew and the Empire's soldiers took a moment to catch their breath, a sense of disbelief mixed with admiration lingered in the air. The events of that day had proven that heroism could emerge from the most unlikely sources. The transformation was not just seen in the battlefield tactics, but was felt in the hearts of every soldier. Lyra, the once dismissed cadet, had become a symbol of hope and strength, a living testament to the power of determination and perseverance. In the quiet aftermath, as the wounded were tended and the living regrouped, the commanders began to discuss what had transpired. They recognized that sometimes the rules of war needed to be rewritten by those who dared to challenge tradition. And in that room, with maps laid out and plans being redrawn, the legacy of the underdog who had shocked the forces was already beginning to take shape. Her actions had not only turned the tide of battle, but had also ignited a spark that promised to reshape the future of the Empire's military forever. A new legend is born. Conclusion and reflection. As the sun began to set over the battlefield, its golden rays casting long shadows over the fallen, a sense of quiet victory settled over the Empire's forces. The enemy had withdrawn, leaving behind a field littered with broken weapons and the echoes of a battle that would not soon be forgotten. Among the cadets, whispers spread like wildfire, whispers of the underdog who had changed everything. Lyra stood among her fellow soldiers, her breathing heavy, her muscles aching, but her spirit unshaken. Around her, cadets who had once laughed at her now looked at her with something different in their eyes. Not pity, not doubt, but respect. Some offered quiet nods, others clapped her on the back, and a few even muttered words of admiration. Nearby, the commanders watched the young cadet with careful eyes. The high-ranking officers, men and women who had spent decades shaping the Empire's military, had been forced to rethink their understanding of what made a warrior truly great. Strength and tradition had long dictated who would rise and who would fall, but Lyra had proven that sheer willpower, determination, and adaptability were just as important, perhaps even more so. In the command tent, a heated discussion took place. The young lieutenant who had first vouched for Lyra stood firm. "She's more than just lucky," he argued. "Her instincts, her movements, the way she adapts, it's not something you can teach in a classroom. She worked for this. She earned this." The general, an older man who had seen countless battles, folded his arms. "She broke tradition," he mused, his voice thoughtful rather than critical. "And in doing so, she may have saved this battle." A long pause followed. Then, with a slow nod, he made his decision. "Promote her. She's proven herself." Back on the field, as the wounded were tended to and soldiers prepared for the march back to the academy, Lyra was unaware of the decision that had just been made in her favor. Her mind was still racing with the events of the day. The fights, the close calls, the moment she had locked swords with the enemy leader and emerged victorious. She had spent so much time fighting just to be noticed, and now, for the first time, she wasn't invisible. When an officer finally approached her, the gathered cadets fell silent. "Lyra," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Step forward." She did, standing tall despite her exhaustion. The officer unpinned the rank insignia from his uniform and held it out to her. "By order of the High Command, for valor and excellence in combat, you are hereby promoted. You will train alongside the elite forces and receive advanced combat instruction." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cadets exchanged stunned glances, and even the most seasoned warriors in the ranks couldn't hide their surprise. Lyra, the cadet who had once been a joke, had not only proven herself, she had risen above them all. For a moment, she hesitated, staring at the insignia in the officer's hands. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she had worked for in the silence of early mornings and long nights. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. As she took the insignia, a quiet sense of triumph filled her. She had done it. The march back to the academy was different from the one that had brought them to battle. Where there had been skepticism, there was now admiration. Where there had been laughter, there was now respect. Some of the cadets who had once mocked her now walked beside her, asking questions, seeking to learn. Even those who remained silent regarded her with newfound acknowledgement. But Lyra knew her journey wasn't over. The battlefield had proven her strength, but the road ahead would be just as challenging. There were still many lessons to learn, many battles to fight, and many warriors who would test her. Yet, As she walked through the academy gates, she no longer felt like an outsider. She was no longer just the underdog struggling to be noticed. She was a warrior. A legend was beginning, one that would be told for years to come. The unlikely cadet who had been laughed at had now become the Empire's rising star. And as she looked ahead, she knew this was only the beginning.